How much pain can a person carry and still make it through the day? Good Morning Midnight opens with a quiet collapse, one that happens entirely inside. This is not a story of dramatic events, but of sustained loneliness. The protagonist, Sasha Jansen, is a middle-aged woman living alone in Paris. She moves between cheap hotel rooms, bars, and streets. At first glance, she appears merely depressed and defeated by life. But gradually, we see that her present is layered with unresolved loss. Sasha's life is marked by repetition of loss. Failed relationships, a broken marriage, the death of a child, and social exclusion. Her memories do not follow a timeline. Past and present blur, intruding without warning, consuming the now. Good Morning Midnight presents female isolation with brutal honesty. Sasha is no longer young, no longer desirable, and no longer financially secure. As a result, she becomes nearly invisible. The novel asks, how easily does society erase a woman once she is deemed unnecessary? Sasha's self-mockery is not personality, it is self-protection. By expecting nothing, she avoids further disappointment. Her humor is a final shield against despair. This novel offers no clear redemption arc, yet it is not a story of total defeat. The act of remembering, of speaking, of enduring another day becomes a form of resistance. The novel remains painfully relevant. It speaks to mental isolation, aging, and the invisible suffering beneath ordinary appearances. Now let's explore how Sasha's inner monologue illuminates modern experiences of psychological isolation, female identity, and aging, and the quiet strategies people use to survive emotional pain.
Today, we're diving into a title that sounds like both a greeting and a goodbye, Good Morning Midnight. It just perfectly captures this single moment in time right before the entire world was about to change forever. And it does it through the stories of two very different worlds, both living right on the edge.
So that title, it actually comes from these incredibly haunting lines by Emily Dickinson. It's this idea of embracing the darkness after you've been rejected by the light. And you really couldn't find a more perfect inspiration for Jean Rice's 1939 novel, a book that just nails that feeling of melancholy and despair of an era about to be plunged into the long night of war.
And that really gets to the heart of what we're exploring today. You know, in that fragile peace between two massive world wars, people and whole communities who were pushed to the fringes of society, well, they didn't just survive. They built these intricate, vibrant, and deeply personal worlds for themselves. We're going to look at two of them, side by side, one from a novel and one that was very, very real. And we're going to see how quickly and how brutally they were erased.
Okay, so let's set the scene. We are in the 1920s and 30s. Europe is living in this long, dark shadow of the Great War. But at the same time, there's this absolute explosion of creative, cultural, and social freedom. It's this incredible moment, but it's a freedom that's always kind of looking over its shoulder, totally aware of the darkness that's gathering on the horizon. This timeline really puts everything into perspective, doesn't it? You can almost see these two stories running on parallel tracks. At the same time Jean Rice is living through the very experiences that are going to fuel her fiction, Weimar Berlin is becoming this haven for a queer subculture unlike anything the world had ever seen before. And then you see it. Just as one story hits its literary climax in 1939, the other is being systematically taken apart by the rise of the Nazis.
So, let's actually meet our subjects. On one hand, we have a fictional woman, Sasha Jansen. She's the main character in Rice's novel. And on the other, we have the very real queer community of Berlin. Now, what ties them together? It's their status as outsiders. Both were defined by the society around them as people who lived on the margins.
And this slide just brilliantly shows how being marginalized can take on totally different forms. For Sasha, it's deeply personal. It's psychological. She's an outsider because of her gender, her age, her colonial background, her poverty. She feels like she's constantly being watched, being judged. But for the queer community in Berlin, the marginalization was official. It was legal and social. There was this old law, paragraph 175, that basically criminalized their very existence. Even during this so-called tolerant period, they were dealing with police raids, blackmail, public scorn. The point is, both were living under a constant, looming threat.
So what do you do when the world pushes you to the very edge? Well, you build your own. And that is exactly what our subjects did. They didn't just retreat into the shadows, they built these elaborate, incredible worlds to survive in and even thrive in, despite their hostile environments.
Sasha's world is this internal fortress. And look at her tools. They're all about managing her own psychological state. A new hat? That's not just a hat, that's armor. A drink isn't just a drink, it's a way to literally stop time and numb the pain. Cafes and cheap hotel rooms, they become her safe zones because she can be anonymous there. She builds this entire world inside herself as a defense against a city that feels like it's constantly attacking.
And then you have Berlin, which was the complete opposite. Their world was external, it was visible, and it was defiantly communal. I mean, we're talking about a massive network of over 100 gay and lesbian bars and clubs. There were dozens of magazines and newspapers made for them, sold openly on the street. Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld founded not just the world's first gay rights organization, but an entire institute for sexual science. They even got the police to issue official transvestite passes to protect cross-dressers from being arrested. This was a culture that absolutely demanded to be seen.
But here's the thing. These worlds, one built from psychological defenses and the other from public defiance, were incredibly fragile. They were totally built on borrowed time, on these unspoken agreements that could be canceled at any second. The midnight was coming. And this is the crucial part. The entire vibrant culture of gay Berlin existed under this legal sword of Damocles. Paragraph 175 was always there. Sure, the police might have had a tolerant policy that allowed the clubs and magazines to exist, but that was just a policy. It wasn't a right. It could change with a new police chief, a new government, any time. Their freedom was completely conditional.
And Jean Rees gives us the psychological version of that exact same threat. This quote is just so powerful. For Sasha, the city itself is the enemy. The buildings aren't just buildings, they are frowning and leering and sneering monsters. And this isn't just simple paranoia. It's the feeling of living in a world that is fundamentally hostile to who you are, whether that hostility is written down in a law book or it's just something you feel in the air.
And then it happened. That conditional tolerance was revoked, and the psychological fortress was breached. For both of the worlds we're talking about, the end wasn't some slow decline. No, it was swift, it was brutal, and it was a total collapse. The lights just went out.
I mean, just look at how systematic this was. The Nazis didn't just let the culture fade away. They actively murdered it. Immediately, in 1933, the entire infrastructure of the community, the bars, the magazines, all of it, destroyed. The intellectual heart of it all, Hirschfeld's Institute, was ransacked, its priceless library burned in the streets. And then they weaponized the law, rewriting paragraph 175 to be so broad that even a glance could get you prosecuted. A culture that had been so defiantly visible was forced into terrified invisibility.
And here is the human cost. What was once a vibrant community became a horrifying statistic. An estimated 50,000 men prosecuted under that revised law. And somewhere between 5,000 and 15,000 of them were murdered in concentration camps. A world that had celebrated life was systematically turned into an apparatus of death.
And as this huge societal world is collapsing, so too is Sasha's personal internal one. The novel ends not with a bang, but with this quiet, terrifying surrender. After pushing away one last chance at a real human connection, she opens her hotel room door to this menacing stranger next door, basically welcoming her own destruction. It's the death of the self, a complete collapse into the very despair that had been lurking just outside her door the whole time.
So we're left with this question, right? The vibrant world of gay Berlin was annihilated. Sasha Jensen's fragile inner world collapsed. When history just rolls on, when the lights go out for good, what's left of these incredible, fragile spaces that people build for themselves on the margins? Maybe it's just a story. But a story can also be a warning, a powerful reminder of just how quickly a fragile dawn can turn into a very long, very dark midnight.